important right, and it will spread, I think, to Saudi Arabia and possibly to China too, in a different way and in different forms, but it won't happen in those parts of the world without a struggle. Meanwhile, those of people who live in actually existing democracies have to see how they are failing. And they are failing because they are committed dogmatically to a single economic system, which doesn't permit itself to be touched or altered. That's the problem.
Yes.
Hi, Tariq. I was wondering, do you think that possibly the most dangerous problem currently is the fact that we have a singly dominated press in the West, mainly by Rupert Murdoch?
You got the question?
Press.
Yes.
Dominated.
We have a single press dominated by Rupert Murdoch. Is that the big problem?
Well, it is funny you say that because, you know, if you switch on during a crisis or even at other times, CNN, BBC World, or their followers in other parts of the world, it's always interests me is that the news management is the same headlines, the same attitudes, defending the same things, which is because most of Europe and Australia and New Zealand go along with what the United States is doing. So very rapidly, what happens is that media agenda of the United States is picked up and carried through elsewhere. The good thing is the following, that in many parts of the world now, you have alternative television networks, so people don't have to watch BBC and CNN World. In the Arab world, they watch Al Jazeera. And in Britain, where Al Jazeera is available on cable, many of us watch Al Jazeera just to see what's going on. Because, no, I'm telling you, the actual number of people watching the news diminishes when there's a crisis because no one believes them. So people are watching Al Jazeera, and a report has just been published in the States that in the United States, this is a country where Al Jazeera is not allowed to broadcast, is not given a license to even go on cable television in the land of the free. Because in the land of the free, freedom is limited, circumscribed, except to the President of the United States, who it is now publicly reported, throughout the crisis in Egypt, had two television networks. One was the American channel, and the other was Al Jazeera, switched on in the White House. So he can watch it, but American citizens can't, lest they get naughty ideas. And that is very, very noticeable. And it's, you know, there is an important development, what has happened to the media, that throughout the Cold War period, when the enemy was communism, and because in communist countries you had one-party systems and a press totally dominated and controlled by those parties, it became absolutely crucial for the West to show that we are different. Of course, everyone knew they were economically different, but they showed we are politically different. We allow dissident voices in our press, in our television. Look, and people did look and notice, and it was largely true. I mean, if you compare coverage of the Vietnam War with the coverage of the Iraq and Afghan wars, there is no comparison. The Iraq and Afghan wars are barely reported on television in your countries where you have troops, countries that have troops in there. So, but since the collapse of communism and that enemy, they don't feel the need to do that anymore, and they've almost become like that enemy, where the voices are bland, dissent is not forbidden, but it's not really encouraged at all, and diverse voices are not heard, which is why so many alternative networks and bloggers and alternative radio stations and internet sites is what many people go to when there are crises and wars.
Over here? Oh,
yes.
Tuesday of this week, Counterpunch listed the 3 or 4 networks in the US that show Al Jazeera. Tuesday.
Who said?
It was in an article in Counterpunch,
Yeah.
which you write for occasionally, on Tuesday this week. They listed the 3 or 4 networks that show Al Jazeera in the US.
They're very small, actually. Yeah. Yeah, they're very small. Basically, what Al Jazeera wants is the same rights it has in Europe. And in Europe, it is available if you subscribe to a cable channel. Curiously enough, in Britain, it's available on a Sky channel because, as you know, Rupert never rejects anybody's money.
Yes, up here. We'll have a couple more questions. We'll wrap up.
Thanks very much. Tariq, I agree completely with your point that the economic crisis is actually much more important than Obama and who gets the presidency of the American. But the last economic crisis, as you said, was patched over, and the same system, indeed the same individuals, Bernanke, Paulson and so on, are still running the show. The next crisis, which undoubtedly will come, the environmental issues will have got much more serious, particularly in terms of oil prices and the possibility of peak oil being here. And certainly the largest issue of all, climate change, the inability to completely ignore this. I mean, even the Chinese are quite clear that they believe it's happening and that they are doing something about it. So it's quite possible that the next economic crisis will, if not exactly coincide with an environmental crisis, it will have to take some notice of it. So it'll be much more, it'll be bigger. Can you respond to that, please?
Well, it might well be. The honest answer is I don't know whether it will be or not, but it's perfectly possible. And the ecological crisis that has grabbed planet Earth is undeniable now. And the only way out of it, really, is not creating new billion-dollar private industries, designed to sort of improve the carbon footprint. But actually, if you're serious about that, it means that we have to learn to live differently in order to save this planet for future generations. And that means an element of social planning in the way we live, because not everyone on this planet, the population explosion is too great, can live with 2 cars and 5 homes and all that. So things need to be done, and this certainly is being discussed and incorporated in many alternative discussions that are taking place. Obama very happily, just before the deep sea oil digging disaster, was saying that how necessary that is, and attacking the namby-pamby green-minded people who say we have to stop exploring the ocean bed. 2 weeks later, it hit him in the face. And then the line changed slightly, yeah.
Okay.
Tariq,
sorry, we'll go at the back here first.
Yeah. Tariq, if we could just return to the question of Libya. There's a discussion now amongst the NATO powers about whether to intervene in Libya could well be the next US war in the Middle East. I'm curious about your thoughts on that. I mean, it seems to me that the opposition to Gaddafi is doing very well without foreign intervention, and many within that camp don't want it. And if we were to be consistent, perhaps Syria and Iran should impose a no-fly zone to prevent the US sending mercenaries into their neighbours in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I'd be curious to know what you think.
Well, look, we need to close the meeting now, actually, but I think what is very clear is, in my opinion, is that any Western intervention would be totally misguided in Libya. Completely misguided. It will play into Gaddafi's hands. I mean, he's already been saying that this whole plot against me has been organized by the Americans and the British. And if they mounted any intervention in Libya, they don't even know what to do. The intervention in Iraq, we've seen what a disaster that's been, with 1 million Iraqis dead and 5 million orphans in that country. So I think the best thing the United States and its vassal states should do is to keep out of that part of the world. People are quite capable, even though it takes some time and they suffer casualties, of sorting these problems out for themselves one way or the other.
One more question here.
I think we should close it.
Yes, last one.
Tariq, will you respond
Just here.
in the
One
centre?
here, and that's it.
Could you respond, please, to a thesis that a combination of arrogance, high level of parochialism and religiosity with an unsustainable level of national debt makes the US the greatest threat to global instability?
I think you may have actually already answered your own question.
Well, it does, but I think that reports of the decline and implosion of the American empire are greatly exaggerated. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a long, long process. There's no challenge to it from anywhere else, and can't be, because what its weaknesses are economically and socially, it makes up for militarily. The American military budget is still larger than the budgets of the next 10 countries put together. And it increasingly uses its military strength to make up for its economic deficiencies, and will carry on doing so unless and until there is a rebellion from within the United States. So one has to trust the American people that sooner or later they will do something. The mouse will roar.
I just want to take the privilege of a final question, Tariq. With your experience from the 60s and looking at the revolutions of today, do you see a reverberation? Do you see what are the differences and the similarities between the late 1960s, where you were centrally involved, to what you're seeing in the Middle East today, and in other movements like Croatia?
Well, the big difference is the time in which each is placed. In the 60s was a period of hope, a period that if you acted, you could actually change society, bring about huge social transformations, make revolutions, because it wasn't a society dominated by one country. It was a multipolar world that we lived in. It wasn't just the United States. And the space given by the fact that it was a multipolar world meant that many people could act and felt that they could act to change their own lives. Today, that is totally different. And it's very noticeable in the slogans of the movements in the Arab world and elsewhere. They understand the world in which they are operating and moving better than many others, and therefore they restrict their demands to what they believe can be achieved immediately, and thus create a space for further changes later on, which is why I've been comparing the Arab revolutions and uprisings to the 1848 uprisings that shook all of Europe. Some succeeded, but essentially they created a tremor which carried on repeating itself till the last victories were won. And that is the world we live in, and we have to accept that.
Thank you very much, Tariq. I